Hi friends, welcome back to our channel and Prophecy. Today in this video, I am going to explain some of the difficult passages which is in the Bible. The first thing is John chapter 20 verse 10. How could Jesus walk through a closed door with a physical body? The problem is, it is inferred by some critics that since the resurrected Christ could appear in a room with closed doors, John chapter 20 verse 10, this proves that his body must have dematerialized to do so, showing that his resurrection body was not essentially or continuously material. However, many other scriptures indicate that Jesus' resurrection body was literal flesh and bones. Luke chapter 24 verse 39, that could eat physical food and even had a crucifixion scars in it. Luke chapter 24 verse 40 to 43. Now I am going to give a solution which is also in the Bible. Jesus' resurrection body was essentially and continuously material. See on Luke chapter 24 verse 34. The fact that Jesus could get into a room with a closed door in no way proves that he had to dematerialize in order to do it. This is clear for several reasons. First, that does actually say Jesus passed through a closed door. It simply says that when the doors were shut, where the disciples were assembled for the fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood in the midst. The Bible does not say how he got into the room. Second thing is, if he chose to do so, Jesus could have performed the same miracle before his death in his pre-resurrection material body. As the Son of God, his miraculous powers were just a great before the resurrection. Third thing is, even before his resurrection, Jesus performed miracles with his physical body that transcended natural laws, such as walking on the water, John chapter 6 verse 16 to 20. But walking on the water did not prove that his pre-resurrection body was immaterialized. Otherwise, Peter's pre-resurrection walk on water, Matthew chapter 14 verse 29, would mean his body dematerialized for a moment and then quickly rematerialized. Fourth thing is, although physical, the resurrection body is by its very nature a supernatural body. See in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verse 44. Hence, it should be expected that it can do supernatural things such as appearing in a room with closed doors. The fifth thing is, according to modern physics, it is not impossibility for a material object to pass through a door. It is only statistically improbable. Physical objects are mostly empty space. All that is necessary for one physical object to pass through another if for the right alignment of particles in the two physical objects. This is no problem for the one who created the body in the first place. The second difficult passage in the Bible is written in Deuteronomy chapter 24 verse 1 to 4, which says Moses teaching on divorce contrary to the teaching of Jesus and Paul. Deuteronomy chapter 24 verse 1 to 4. What is the problem? According to Deuteronomy chapter 24 verse 1 to 4, a man allowed to divorce his wife if he had found her to be unfaithful. However, according to the teaching of Jesus in Mark chapter 10 verse 1 to 12 and the teaching of Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 verse 10 to 16, it seems that a man is not permitted to divorce his wife and remarry. It is the teaching in the Deuteronomy contrary to the teaching of Jesus and Paul. The solution is, it would be a mistake to assume that the statements of Moses here gave divine sanction to divorce. The passage presents a hypothetical situation which was likely to happen among the people. It simply says that if a man divorces his wife because of some uncleanness in her, and if she remarries, and if her new husband dies or divorces her, it is unlawful for the first husband to take her back. This is not a sanction of divorce, rather, it is an acknowledgement of the fact of divorce and the implementation of regulation concerning remarriage. As Jesus said in Mark chapter 10 verse 5, Moses allowed divorce and gave the people this precept because of the hardness of their hearts, but this is not God's ideal. God's ideal for marriage was that there be a lifetime commitment between husband and wife. There is no contradiction here. Moses' teaching and the teaching of Jesus and Paul. Moses simply recognized that fact of divorce, while Jesus and Paul present God's ideal for marriage, and it was from the beginning. The third difficult passage which is mentioned in the Bible, 1 Samuel chapter 6 verse 19. Why did God strike the people of Beth-Shemesh with such a severe judgment for looking into the ark? The problem is, when the Philistines returned the ark of the Lord to Israel, they placed it on an ox cart and sent it down the road without a driver. When the oxen had pulled the cart into the borders of Beth-Shemesh, the people of the Beth-Shemesh took the ark off of the cart and placed it on a large stone. However, some of the men of Beth-Shemesh looked into the ark, and the Lord struck the people with a great slaughter. Verse 19. But why did God strike the people with such a severe judgment? Simply because they looked into the ark. The answer is, the Lord struck the people with judgment because they committed a terrible sacrilege against God. The Ark of the Covenant was a symbol of the very present God among his people. Regulation concerning the Ark and how it was to be treated were of the strictest nature because of the holiness of God and the sinfulness of man. Example, chapter 25 verse 10 to 22, chapter 26 verse 32 to 34, chapter 37 verse 1 to 9. Such an impious act of disregard for God's holiness certainly merited the sudden and terrible judgment of God. The fourth difficult passage which is mentioned in the Bible, John chapter 20 verse 22. Now let's analyze the problem. In Acts, the apostles are told to wait until Pentecost before they receive the Holy Spirit. Acts chapter 1 verse 4 to 8. Yet, even before his crucifixion, Jesus breathed on his disciples and said, receive the Holy Spirit. John chapter 20 verse 22. Didn't they receive the Holy Spirit at this point and not later at Pentecost? Now the answer is, first of all, the John passage is a difficult one with no direct parallels, and it is hard to know exactly what it means. And like all obscure passages, one should not base any major teaching on it. The second thing is, some scholars believe that the imperative receive is intended to denote the future you will receive. If so, then there is no conflict. The third thing is, even if Jesus meant them to receive the Holy Spirit and that moment in John chapter 20 verse 22, it was apparently in a different sense. Here the Spirit is given to forgive the sins. But in Acts chapter 1 verse 8, the Spirit was to be given to provide power to be witnesses for him to the end of the earth. Fourth thing is, promise of the Spirit in John was his indwelling the believer, not for his being baptized by the Holy Spirit, which is a different act of the Holy Spirit. In this sense, then there is no conflict between the two passages, since they speak of different activities of the Spirit which came at the different times. Thank you.